play. And then again, welcome everyone. I'm just gonna I'll call on you to announce yourself so that Nasser can get to know all of you. First, I'll start with Nasser, if you do want to just introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Nasser Brahim. I'm a senior climate resiliency specialist at Woods Hole Group. I've been working in Massachusetts and surrounding states and elsewhere in the country on climate vulnerability assessments and resiliency plans and implementation projects since about 2013. And prior to that, did similar work internationally.
Thank you very much, Nasser, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go in the way my screens are, so I'll go to Jack Buckley next, if you want to quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jack Buckley. I'm with the Cohasset Center for Student Coastal Research. And two quick fun facts. One of Nasser's colleagues recently joined the firm is Connor Ofchin, who is a Cohasset resident and a CSCR alum. And in the new position at Cohasset in the Resiliency Grant Office is Montana Casal, and she's an alum as well. So just wanted to put that plug in there as fun facts.
Montana will actually be joining this call, which is exciting to see things come full circle. So she's joined the town as our for a year as a resiliency staff person. So she'll be joining us shortly. Next, I'll go to George Baumgarten.
Hi, good morning. George Baumgarten. I'm on the Cohasset Harbor Committee. I also serve in a subgroup under that, the Cohasset Harbor Implementation Planning Group. And together with Lisa Hewitt-Dick, also of the Harbor Committee, we did sponsor a series on the Cohasset Harbor Climate Resilience series, a series of 3 initiatives, 3 forums in the spring of this year, so less than a year ago, where we explored a lot of the topics, Nasser, that your firm is going to be really digging into. And very pleased to see that some primary speakers and contributors to that, Tom Bell and Jack Buckley, are on this call, and they did some tremendous work in that area. So pleased to be here with you today.
George, I'll go to Cassandra next.
Hi, I think most of you guys know me. I'm Cassandra Thayer, and I am the assistant town planner for the town, working very closely with both Nasser and Lauren on this project.
Thank you. Tim Davis.
Good morning. Tim Davis. I chair the Cohasset Harbor Committee. I'm also president of Friends of Bassings Beach, which is leading the charge to keep Cohasset Harbor preserved and conserved, and working hopefully in the future, once we get the jurisdiction issues resolved, to be able to build up the eelgrass beds as a resiliency item. Also the breakwater, which probably needs some renovation as well, Nasser. You did great work in them. I followed that. It was a terrific report. I also sent you an email, I don't know if you got it, asking if we could see the grant proposals that you sent in on their behalf. I don't know if that's public information or whether we can get that just for our own edification to see where those successful grants went.
Thanks, Tim. And we'll follow up on that question a bit later on. I'll go to Brian Joyce next.
Good morning, Brian Joyce, Director of Public Works and Town Engineer. I'm one of the stewards of the town's infrastructure, seawalls, roads, water and sewer infrastructure. So there's a lot of that around the harbor, and that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Brian. Next, we'll go to Tom Bell.
You're muted, Tom.
There we go. Sorry. I'm the Vice Chair of the Conservation Commission and President of the Straits Pond Watershed Association, also a member of the Ware River Estuary Park Committee. It's a tri-town committee that is joint between Hingham, Hall, and Cohasset. I also maintain a town, my own copy of a town geographic information system to kind of help me with all 3 of those roles. So I'm be happy to share that with Woods Hole Group as necessary.
And Tom, what's your background, professional background?
I'm
If
a
you-
professional geologist and have worked as a hydrogeologist, mineral exploration, geotechnical engineering. Geologists have to be polyvalent if they want to stay employed.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Sticking with the conservation theme, we'll go to Charlotte Pechtel next.
For 4 hours.
Hi, sorry, my getting my camera to go.
All right.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? I'm Charlotte. I'm the conservation agent. I've been here a little over a year now. And I do have a background in marine science and conservation and policy. So definitely looking forward to helping however I can and working with, Lauren and Cassandra on, our goals. So happy to meet you all.
Great.
Thank you. Next, just Chief Quigley is on the line. I don't know if he's actually, yeah, there he is.
Hey, how you doing, everyone? Police Chief Bill Quigley for the town of Cohasset, and just want to see see if we can help in any way. We also have our Natural Resource Officer Josh Kimball on the line here, and these things impact us as a department as well. Our police station, as you may or may not know, is located on Elm Street, and we're trying to keep from having a better water view than what we have now.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Officer Kimball, for joining us as well. I see you're on the call. And we'll go next finally to Justin Schreier, and then I'll kick it back to Nasser to get us started on our conversation today.
Good morning, Justin Schreier, Town of Cohasset Communications. I work out of the town manager's office here on the second floor. I also have the pleasure of working with Chief Quigley over at the police department, Chief Doc Ray over at the fire department, and Glenn Pratt in emergency management. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to learn this morning. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself. Again, we may have some other participants chime in. As you mentioned, Glenn Pratt, that's another person that I had invited on the call. The same with Chris Senior. So we may have some people tune in and out. I'll let them in as we go. But like I said, we're just going to turn it over to Nasser now to get us started on talking about today's discussion. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and looking forward to collaborating with you, as this project continues and progresses. So this project has a very long grant name, but is essentially a flood vulnerability assessment and development of resiliency strategies for this project area, which includes the James Brook watershed and kind of its nexus with Cohasset Cove. The main focus, I would say, is sort of in the lower part of the watershed in terms of infrastructure that might be impacted in the future, as well as regional strategies to manage future flooding impacts, and also infrastructure strategies to address flood impacts. But we will also be considering strategies that have been evaluated previously and others in the upper parts of the watershed to help deal with rainfall related risks. So the goals of this project, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the project. There are kind of three main goals of the project. The first is to assess the vulnerability of public assets to present and future flooding. And that is both coastal flooding as well as inland flooding and the effects of combined inland coastal events. The second is to develop asset-specific resiliency strategies for critical wastewater infrastructure, namely, of course, the treatment facility and the main pump station that are located in Jacobs Meadow. And the third is to develop regional resiliency strategies to mitigate risks from, again, both coastal and inland flooding to kind of the broader set of critical infrastructure and important economic, cultural, and environmental resources in the project area. So that includes things like the village and, Jacobs Brook salt marsh, other fringe salt marsh around the area, things like the police station, et cetera. So the third piece here I know is going to be of great interest to folks. It's also kind of coming later in the project schedule, which we'll review. So we'll have an initial chance to kind of to get your initial ideas about things we should be considering early on here now in this conversation, but wanted to kind of keep your focus on those three main goals. So to develop, to kind of do this work, to do the vulnerability assessment, to develop these strategies, we're developing an integrated flood model, which is being developed through a direct contract with the town. So it's not the grant funded part of this project, but it is happening alongside it. And this model will be used to define the future flood exposure and risks for the project area, and to assess the vulnerabilities. It'll also be used to inform kind of the questions of how high, when, where do we need to implement wastewater infrastructure resilience strategies. And we'll also be using the model to actually test and identify regional resiliency strategy alternatives to see how effective would these strategies be under these different types of scenarios. I could keep going. We'll have a good section in the end for Q&A. So if you have burning questions, maybe jot them down for a second so you don't forget, and we can come back to this. The scope of this project, again, this is the CZM funded portion of the project, is includes 5 different tasks. So we're currently in the first task. We're kind of wrapping up pretty quickly here. The goal is to kind of have some kickoff meetings with key stakeholders, such as yourselves, to review and synthesize existing information from plans and previous initiatives about the area, flooding risks, and resiliency opportunities. And the deliverable will be a summary of findings, which is kind of like an extended version of this presentation, as well as some base maps that will be developed with GIS information. So Tom, I may follow up with you after this call to see what kind of data you have. The second task is actually using the model that we're developing, again, under the separate contract, actually using that model to conduct all these different simulations. And we'll be analyzing and preparing coastal flood risk maps using the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. I have a bunch of information about kind of the modeling approach as extra slides at the end of this presentation. If there are questions about it, certainly we'll be discussing it later in the project as this part of it, the work sort of gets going. The key part of this modeling work is that it's probabilistic. So we're not just looking at, a rare event like a 1% annual chance, or commonly known as a 100-year event. We're going to be looking at a full range of probabilities, a full range of return periods or recurrences. And so that's going to give us a good sense for things that might be vulnerable in less extreme events, as well as the most extreme events. So it'll give us the full range of possibilities. And we'll be doing that for rainfall-driven flooding under current sea level conditions, as well as future sea level conditions. And we'll be doing that dynamically so that we're accounting for the probability that a rainfall event occurs at a high tide versus a low tide versus a medium tide. We'll also be modeling some combined rainfall and storm surge events. So we're going to, at the end of this, have a modeling report and with, replete with maps and GIS data that show, again, kind of the distribution of these flood risks across the project area. Task 3 is a vulnerability assessment. So we'll be taking that, information about what's on the ground from task 1, kind of what's existing, as well as the flood risk information, and we'll be carrying out a vulnerability assessment. So we'll be looking at the timing and relative risk of different coastal flood pathways. The town previously had a project with maybe some partners that are on this call that identified storm tide pathways, which are places where water would first kind of cross the coastline and then start affecting larger areas. So we'll be analyzing the timing and relative risk of those based on this probabilistic data. So not just kind of if this is a category 1 or 2 or 3 storm, but really, what's the likelihood of that, all these specific pathways activating. We'll be assessing risks to the treatment plant and pump station in detail in Jacobs Meadow. So looking at the engineering plans, visiting the site, and assessing the vulnerabilities there, as well as looking kind of at a higher level at manholes and inflow that could happen in the surrounding sewer shed. And then we'll be also assessing risks to other public infrastructure at a higher level. So we won't be going through and detailing all the, looking through all the detailed engineering drawings for the police station, for example, but we will be looking at, some information that we can gather relatively quickly to look at, what the likelihood of flooding and timing of flooding would be for facilities like that. The deliverable will be another report, a vulnerability assessment report, as well as a public meeting. And then in task 4, we'll be starting with resiliency strategies. So we'll have wastewater resiliency strategies. We'll come up with some conceptual options, costs, and identify potential funding sources. We'll be developing a report and having a meeting with the sewer commission to kind of go through those findings and get feedback on recommendations and next steps. And then task 5 is again one of the more interesting pieces probably to everybody, because we all want to work towards solutions, which is looking at regional resiliency strategies and then modeling those. So we'll be developing 3 alternative strategy sets, which would include multiple different interventions in each strategy set. They'll include green infrastructure type strategies, whether that be upstream, looking at stormwater retention, or things that have been looked at in the past, such as the wiggle, as well as gray infrastructure strategies, such as raising a road, for example, in a low-lying storm tide pathways. We'll be also looking at the hydraulic infrastructure, the tide gates and conduits, and seeing whether adjustments to those would make a major difference. And so we'll also be developing kind of some specific recommendations for the Elm Street Corridor project as a kind of a priority project that the town is currently kind of identified as important and still kind of in the early stages of design. So we hope that this project will help influence that to maybe be a resilient infrastructure improvement project in the future. And we'll be evaluating strategies also to protect salt marsh in Jacobs Meadow by looking at the operations of the tide gates and seeing how that can be adjusted over time to deal with sea level rise to ensure that the salt marsh can continue to persist there, as well as potentially some of the green strategies along the coastline may also include looking at protecting fringe salt marsh that might help to reduce erosion and protect the existing coastal structures or enhanced structures that may be needed in the future. And the final report will come out of task 5, focusing on those regional resiliency strategies and the results of the modeling of how effective, to determine how effective those strategies are, as well as a public meeting to share those results with the public and get feedback. This is a bit of our roadmap. So we're here in November. We're going to be working. We're currently still developing that model. We got a bit of a late start, but due to just things outside our control. But we're working on developing that model. We've got some great data from a previous previous master plan, the flood control master plan that was done in the late 2000s. So we're working with that data to try to see if we can catch up a bit on the flood modeling piece. And then we'll be actually running those simulations, hopefully in December, January timeframe, and processing the results in January, February timeframe. So we'll have vulnerability assessment results in February, March, a public meeting in March, and the wastewater resiliency recommendations will be in April, and the regional resiliency recommendations will be in June, as well as the final public meeting. So we have until June 30th, 2023 to wrap this project up. That's the grant deadline. So that is our ultimate end date. But, I've seen it happen where we have, a final meeting that maybe stretches a little bit beyond that, or, maybe responding to some public comments or something that may happen slightly beyond that time frame. But that's our goal. So one of the parts of the task 1, our first task here, was to kind of look at what are the existing plans in place that the town has developed, different initiatives, and to summarize the key findings from those initiatives, and then kind of think about how does this project help advance priorities or issues identified in those things. And the great news is that this project was designed specifically to build on a lot of these prior initiatives, so we can advance those priorities. This is a summary table here. I won't go through it all the detail, but I'll kind of do a quick summary here. I also have additional slides that'll be part of the kind of bigger package of information that you can review to kind of see specifically which goals we're talking about when we say that this project's going to advance those goals. So the 2008 flood control master plan was developed. This was primarily focused on inland flooding, recognizing that there's an existing recurring problem under in certain areas under present climate conditions, and that there are some strategies that were identified that are technically feasible but challenging to implement from a cost perspective, property ownership, and permitting perspective. But this project will take a look at those strategies as well as others potentially, and combine them with, again, looking at future conditions and coastal flooding issues to evaluate regional resiliency strategies. So we're definitely not going to ignore in any way that work that was done previously. We'll intend to advance it and test it for future resilience. In around the 2012 and ongoing sort of time frame, Jacobs Meadow was the culvert and tide gate improvements were implemented. This really was done to address both flooding as well as the salt marsh health. And the results of that were positive from what we understand, that the improvements, continue to be adjusted a little bit in terms of the elevations at which the gates would close or open to, again, increase its flood control and restoration performance. This project will, again, evaluate the performance of those improvements under future climate conditions, again, so testing how well they last over time with changing sea level conditions and upstream flooding. And we'll look at potential mitigation strategies to deal with any loss of performance. The town did a vulnerability assessment, sort of high level preparedness plan through the MVP program, which is a state grant program. I'm sure many of you participated in that. It identified flooding, both inland and coastal, as a top challenge. And so, of course, we're advancing, progress on that first top priority hazard, and also identified a number of different strategies to build flood resiliency, which we're advancing about half of them in some way, shape, or form in this project. The Cohasset Master Plan, again, this was really key in identifying resiliency as a town-wide goal for future development. And so it's great that our project will advance about, all of the recommended strategies to meet that specific goal that was identified in the master plan. The hazard mitigation plan, again, identified coastal and inland flooding as significant risks, particularly for this area, and identified, some of the infrastructure and assets that would be vulnerable to those impacts. And this project's going to advance that, that work by doing a more detailed vulnerability assessment and evaluating flood resiliency strategies for 4 out of the 9 areas of high flooding concern, which all happen to be in this project area. And looking at the highest concern, infrastructure, the wastewater facilities and other public assets. The municipal harbor plan, you guys did a lot in 2020. So the municipal harbor plan also did an analysis of tidal and coastal flooding. It was not probabilistic, so we're going to be using the best, latest available data, plus the new data that's being developed as part of this project to improve that data for making the future decisions, and also advancing 8 out of the 11 recommendations for edge areas, which we're concerned with. How do you adapt to future sea level rise and coastal flooding? As I mentioned previously, there's the MVP storm tide pathways study that was done. A lot of different coastal flooding pathways were identified in Cohasset, and a quarter of them are in the project area. So we're going to be looking at those, as I mentioned previously, in more detail, and evaluating resiliency strategies to address those pathways. And since 2020, the Elm Street Corridor Working Group, as part of the implementation of the master plan, have been doing some community engagement. That engagement has identified a significant public concern about flooding and climate change. So, we're going to be continuing public engagement through this project, as I mentioned, through a series of public meetings and reports, and again, evaluating flood resiliency strategies that could be incorporated into that project in the future. And then finally, as was mentioned in the introductions, you had your great climate resilience forums earlier in the year. And so we saw that, many of basically everybody that I see here, all the departments represented here, were participating in that. And it was great to see that you're already thinking about climate resiliency and taking action through your various capacities. So we hope to address many of the questions and issues raised in those presentations and subsequent Q&A sessions that remain unanswered due to the lack of data or the lack of kind of that deep dive into solutions and what they might look like. So that's my formal presentation part. As I mentioned, I've got a lot of extra slides depending on where this goes, but wanted to focus the group in on a couple of key questions. Before we dive into the 4 questions, maybe we could just open it to questions on some of the previously presented material.
And folks, just feel free to either unmute yourself, chime in. You don't have to do a formal hand raise, just sort of nebulous conversation here.
I have a question about task 1, but it's more of a hypothesis and a proposal, and I'll save it for the end.
Okay. I'll come back to you.
So I have a question now. So the I think you said deliverables is the model, and did you say 3 strategies? So is there? I'm just trying to get my head around. What will we be able to test out multiple different infrastructure improvements and see what the impact is on inland? So obviously, probably one of the biggest pieces of infrastructure, as you mentioned, is the wastewater treatment plant. But say if we raised the breakwater by 3 or 4 feet, will that then lower the floodwaters at the plant an equivalent amount, rather than doing, say, 1,400 linear feet of seawall that we own in around the harbor? Kind of minimize the the focus point. So I'm wondering, can we do combinations of things? Seawall, breakwater. Do we do road, seawall, breakwater, and then run those models and see what the impact is on floodwaters upstream of that? Is that what we're going to be able to do at the end of this?
Yeah, so I said 3 strategy sets. So each strategy set will include multiple interventions. So, one strategy set may say, all right, let's just pretend all of our, kind of fringe strategies are, raising seawalls and roads, right? Like that'll be part 1 to address the coastal piece. And then we're going to do some different, interventions on the inland flooding pieces. That's going to be strategy set 1. Strategy set 2 might be, okay, what if we do a breakwater and a lower, elevate roadways to a lesser degree, or don't elevate roadways or seawalls. Sorry, I'm having construction at my house here. And then the 3rd strategy set may be some combination of the 2. So we haven't developed those yet. We're very early in the project to be kind of musing about what they might be. But I think the answer to your question is yes, we will be combining multiple strategies into these strategy sets. So we like to test those types of questions. And yeah, so yes.
All right, so just one follow-up. So the model, what's the software that you're using, and will we have that model at the end of it?
Yeah, so we're using a model for the hydrologic and hydraulic portion of this, called ICM2D. ICM2D is a proprietary model that we pay a fee for. So, you would presumably, if you wanted to use ICM2D to run the model, could use it. We could certainly provide you with the model files as well. But it can also be exported into data that's compatible with free models like SWIM, or we can also we'll give you the data in GIS format too, so that you have all the data we're collecting on inverts and rim elevations and pipe sizes and types. You'll have all that data about your infrastructure that we're able to compile as part of this project.
Okay, great. And is that modeling similar to how FEMA creates the firm maps? Are you doing like wave run up and things like that, or?
Yeah, so so I was just explaining for the inland portion. So for the coastal portion, we've already kind of done this modeling statewide. So we have this this model it's called Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. It's developed using primarily kind of a coupled AdCirc model and SWAN model. In other parts of the country, AdCirc and SWAN are used by FEMA to generate data that is then used in their process for doing flood mapping. It's not used directly, which we think is unfortunate, but understandable because of their constraints having to do this nationwide. So I have more detail on the modeling strategy, on the modeling framework that I could present in this presentation if the group would like to do so, or I could share that with you separately.
Great, thanks.
Nasser, George Baumgarten here, and very excited to see about the research you've done to see the history of this and how you're planning to advance that. One of the things that we on the Cohasset Harbor Implementation Planning Group advanced and Lauren Lind was able to work with us on is there was also a recently produced study by the local engineer Cavanaro of the Margin and Border Street areas that are directly in this area. Specifically, it was to identify very precisely where the public right-of-ways and public land is versus private positions. But it also provides great accurate detail about the survey of the harbor. I didn't see that listed in your set of materials. I would say that we as a public have not studied it in detail, but the CHIP group is about to plan to kick off some at least public invited sessions to review what we see in that survey. And I know Brian Joyce and Lauren have that as well, but it's potentially another resource in terms of precision data that can inform some of the deliverables that you're doing. Didn't know if you were aware of that or not.
Is this the Captain's Walk survey?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we do have that survey data on file. It has been shared with us already. So we will be looking at that, as well as the storm tide pathways data that was collected, which again was kind of precision elevation information about these particular low points where water might cross the shoreline. So we'll be looking at that and integrating any changes into our topographic model, our digital elevation model.
Terrific. Thank you.
Nasser, one of the things that has become clear over the years is that Cohasset has a much better likelihood of being successful in getting grants if there is a community effort on this, a shared effort with our neighbors. If you see those opportunities, whether it's with Situate, Hull, Hingham, or whoever, will this be a part of what you'll be recommending to us?
Sorry about the background noise. I was concerned about using the term regional in terms of regional resiliency strategies, because regional can mean a lot of different things. Our focus here is on this project area, which is entirely within the town of Cohasset. So, I heard the breakwater mentioned previously. I don't think we anticipated in evaluating the breakwater as part of this project or coming up with specific strategies for the breakwater, but it's something we can certainly look at. That's kind of one of the only places I could see this really affecting or requiring regional follow-up with Situate, for example. If we were to look at things kind of beyond the immediate area, beyond the immediate project area. And the reason I say that is because while storm surge, while wave impacts can be reduced by something like a breakwater or by ensuring the resilience of the beach, waterward of that breakwater. It's not going to prevent storm surge flooding. That's not the function of the breakwater is not to reduce storm surge flooding. So unless you were to consider something that would, basically be like it's almost like a big storm surge gate across the entry to the harbor, there's not a strategy like that. So it's sort of, we're more focused on shoreline, I think, strategies here for the coastal risks. I don't know if that is responsive enough, or if you have follow-up questions.
Yes, that I understand what you're saying. Thank you. We will be continuing to look at regional opportunities, just because, for instance, with our efforts to get a brick grant, it just is. It's been shown that Cohasset is not a likely recipient of some of these grants, simply because our demographics are different than other towns.
Yeah, I've heard that as a concern. I've expressed that as a concern to other clients that I've worked with in the region. But I was also reminded by the state that the environmental justice, for example, criteria in the BRIC grant process is a small number of the overall points. So if there is a good project that doesn't quite meet those, but checks a bunch of other boxes and does well from a cost benefit standpoint, I think there's still a good probability of success.
Great, thank you.
As good as you can get with a national competition, for not enough money to go around.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, are you going to speak, Tom? Or
I have a couple of questions, and I think they're broader than just being addressed to Nasser. I wonder whether or not our public water supply is being considered here. We have at least one production well, as I understand it, within the project area, and the aquifer that it draws from is largely within the James Brook watershed. The one one of those wells anyway is pretty close to the same elevation as the wastewater treatment plant, and so I'm wondering if I'm surprised that hasn't been mentioned, that our water supply isn't being addressed as well here.
Yeah, so I'll just add that we have obtained from MAPC the critical assets that were identified and mapped as part of the hazard mitigation plan in 2020. So I believe the well that you're mentioning, as well as other wells that might be in the watershed, are identified as assets. So it would be one of the things that is looked at a kind of a higher level, along with things like the police station as part of this project. We're not doing like a detailed salinity model and groundwater model to evaluate, whether there might be saltwater intrusion in the future, but we will be, providing maps showing future high tide, inland propagations to say where, to where does the future high tide go if nothing is done. And that may be informative, in addition to kind of some sporadic, or maybe in the future, not so sporadic, exposure to storm surge flooding from, which would include saltwater as well. So it will be part of the analysis, but it won't be a detailed kind of groundwater salinity modeling analysis.
So I've read the report that Woods Hole Group has produced for Hingham, and I was favorably impressed with the scope and the alternatives that were presented. Would you say that that's a good analog for what we can expect to see when you're done?
Are you referring to the 2000 15 vulnerability assessment, or the more recent work done on the seawalls?
The more recent one that
Okay.
included the alternatives for various kinds of seawalls. I mean, there's a clear resemblance between the coastal geometry here and the inland low areas, and maybe even to some extent the value of property that would be impacted. So it looks almost compelling that we would want to see something that was very similar to the solutions that were proposed for Hingham.
Yeah, I think certainly as part of the that task 5 regional resiliency strategies, we will be looking at things like the seawalls, which is the Hingham project was primarily looking at seawalls and different strategies along the coast that could be implemented. So we will be looking at those types of alternatives as part of task 5. And I forget whether conceptual level costs are included in the scope. I'll have to take a look back, but it may be. And so you'd be getting something similar in that respect. That project also had a kind of some kind of confluence with upstream flooding questions, which we didn't actually evaluate as part of that project. And this project, that's a major component. So you'll be getting more in some respects and maybe a little bit less in some respects, but very similar types of strategies. And I led that alternative analysis work. So in that project, we were, for everybody else's edification here, there was an existing engineering drawing set, like conceptual drawing set for elevating some of the existing town-owned seawalls along Hingham's Inner Harbor. And we did both a peer review of those, also analyzed how those proposed strategies would fare under future climate, which was somewhat considered, but we used the latest data as we're using in this project to update that evaluation. And then evaluated some long-term kind of adaptation strategies or alternative strategies that could be pursued, and came up with some high-level costs for what that would require.
Thank you.
Hi, Nasser. I just had a quick question. For task 5, would all the recommendations of, the combinations of gray and green solutions, would that also include the cost benefit analysis of like which ones might potentially be the most feasible for this town? Or
I think as part of an alternatives analysis, we will probably produce some kind of matrix with, pluses and minuses, green, yellow, red types of analysis to say, which strategies might be more feasible. We will not be doing a cost benefit analysis. We did we did offer to the town that we have a sub-consultant we work with that does damage estimation. So they would take our modeling outputs and assess, what are the damages to buildings, to infrastructure, et cetera. What are those costs and what's the economic value of those, which could then be used in doing a benefit cost analysis and could be used to inform your BRIC grants or other FEMA grants going forward. But it was kind of too much to bite off for this basically, 7-month project. So we didn't end up including it this time around, but it's definitely something that can be that our results can be used to carry out in the future stage. So without that kind of without the estimation of what the damages would be if there's no project versus with these projects, we can't do a benefit cost analysis in a very strict sense, but costs would be kind of one of the criteria, and other feasibility issues would be other criteria that we would consider in the alternatives analysis.
No, that'd be great. Yeah, I was going to say definitely a general analysis was something I was expecting, but yeah, I didn't since I didn't see it written on there, I figured it wasn't a full scale one wasn't included. But and then I just had one more question about in terms of looking at the salt marsh vulnerability. I think you said it was only around the wastewater facility. Would there be any other evaluations of the salt marsh areas in those most vulnerable areas to see if those are being impacted right now or will be impacted in the near future? I was just curious about how we would evaluate the health of the salt marshes, I guess, in the most vulnerable areas, if that was also included in any of the, vulnerability analysis.
There's existing data. So Woods Hole, I have this set actually as part of my extra slides here. Let me see if I can jump to it. Woods Hole Group did work with the state to do a statewide analysis of how coastal wetlands might transition or evolve. Did I do this wrong? Are you seeing the full screen here? Okay. To see how those wetlands might evolve in the future, under sea level rise projections that are very similar but not exactly the same as the ones that are included in our model. So it was a statewide analysis. So again, not as fine grained as what we might like for something like Jacobs Meadow, where the functioning of a particular hydraulic structure has a key influence on how the infrastructure reacts, or how the ecosystems react. So I did pull in kind of the mapping that was existing as part of that study here. You can see like some of the fringe marshes like kind of showing up a little bit really close to the cove, and then you've got some other areas over here that are a bit potentially outside of where regional solutions would need to be located to address kind of the high risk area that we're primarily concerned with over here. So you can go and look at these online and even see how does that change into 2050 and 2070. That's where you start to see some more possibility of inland propagation of marsh and migration of marsh into either undeveloped areas or developed areas, as you can see over here. The modeling that was done here is kind of irrespective of what's there on the ground, is to say what's the possibility just based on kind of topography and water levels and things like that. So I don't know that we're intending to do like a full scale, delineation of all the salt marsh on the fringe of the cove and assess the future health of those. We're not planning to redo any of the SLAM modeling that was done for the statewide analysis, but it certainly informs our thinking as we look at regional strategies, kind of being aware of what areas could be suitable for salt marsh migration in the future. Is certainly something we'll think about, as well as to kind of see how you transition from more of a high marsh to low marsh over the long run in certain areas. Thankfully, at least in this area, not a ton of marsh loss compared to other communities that we've done this type of work in.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying.
I just have another question, Nasser. So on the modeling, we didn't, we kind of, this is all based around sea level rise, but are you going to include like current sea levels and then projections of, what if sea level goes a foot? What if sea level goes, are you going to have a certain, like a trajectory of this is what the model is based on?
Nasser, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, so we are using the state's sea level rise projections that are consistent with what's included in the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, and those are shown here. So the state, there was an extensive process, including academics and policymakers, et cetera, to decide what to include in this model. We were developing the model around the end of this time frame here, and so we ended up using 2008 as the baseline. So anything you see as present day would be sort of reflective of this period of 1999 to 2017, and the mid-year 2008. So we would expect, we would include 1.3 feet of sea level rise in our 2030 results above this baseline, 2.5 feet above this baseline for 2050, and 4.3 feet above this baseline for 2070. this reflects kind of a high curve, a high sea level rise curve, which to date we're not at. So if we were to go here to 2020, we're not actually at the high curve. We're actually more like at the intermediate curve, which is great for now. But sea level rise may not follow such a linear, or not linear, but a smooth path. There may be fits and starts. And you may have read some different reporting in the about larger, longer term cycles that might affect what sea level we might see in the future. But I would just add that one of the reasons the high curve was chosen was so that these values could continue to be relevant, or the results could continue to be relevant in the event that sea level is actually slower than sea level rise is actually slower than is included in the model. And so, I will often, especially when explaining to the public, explain the results, I will often remind them that, if sea level follows an intermediate curve instead of a high curve, the 2030 results may be more like 2050. The 2050 results may be more like 2070, and the 2070 results may be more like 2100. And so I think it does a good job of kind of bracketing reasonable timeframes, by which these conditions are expected to occur. But in no condition, I certainly don't currently expect sea level to follow a curve lower than the intermediate curve, and the state doesn't even publish what those alternatives might be.
Thank you. So just looking at the baseline, which is actual data, 1930 to present day, it's roughly like 10 inches to a foot. Is that what you're
Yeah,
seeing?
it's about a foot of sea level rise.
All right. We recently did work on a bridge, Border Street Bridge, and that kind of their high tide line matches up with that. Interesting. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, this is based on the Boston Harbor tide gauge, which is a long-term tide gauge in the region.
Hi, Nasser.
Yes.
In terms of, sort of looking forward to the practical alternatives and solutions that you might identify in the forums earlier this year, certainly we looked at some extreme events like storms that might flood Jacobs Meadow or flood the area near Atlantic Avenue. And one of the things that was evident is, the tidal gates, were flowing inward at very high tides. Does your group have experience with various technologies or new developments and innovations in tide gates that, you might be able to bring to bear or recommend communities that have done innovative work in terms of letting stormwater or seawater out of the vulnerable areas in addition to preventing it from coming in?
We do a lot of restoration work involving tide gates and culvert redesigns, etc. We tend to work on those as with partners. So we tend to do the initial conceptual design and modeling of different strategies, including kind of different types of tide gates, different sizes of openings, etc., as well as different operations of those tide gates. I am aware from a restoration standpoint that we have, some fairly low tech, I think, strategies that intend to protect salt marsh areas that are restricted, that have tidal flow restrictions, that can protect them from the impacts of sea level rise, so that in the future they're not being drowned out. And so I don't think that strategy, that technology is novel per se, but the application of it for adaptation is perhaps more novel. I'm aware that you have previously used kind of the automatic tide gates with the floats on them that kind of rise and tide with the rise and fall with the tides. I know now you're using a different system that has manual backups and also monitoring water levels both upstream and downstream of the infrastructure. So there may be other people that I can bring into the process once we get there, and if we determine that that's a key part of the strategy for solving these issues. I'm not sure that I expect it to be the most important item, but it could be. So we're prepared to support in that regard.
Thank you.
This could be, am I unmuted? Yeah, okay. I'll jump in, circling back to my earlier comment in which I said I had a suggestion,
Yes.
kind of based on a hypothesis. I did want to listen to see if I could connect some of the dots. And there's the question that was on the screen. How are your organizational interests served by the project? And so I'd like to just speak briefly about the role of students. And I'll go back to Charlotte's comment when she was asking about the salt marsh delineation and whether aspects of that fall under the purview of this study or not. Students could certainly be doing some salt marsh delineation work. They've plotted 500 data points at Bassing's Beach, indicating percent coverage of dune grass, holding that barrier beach in place to do its job as a barrier beach. Students have Zoomed with Mark Borelli about the storm tide pathways, and they've received his data, put that in the form of a GIS layer. They've also done in the past some Phragmites work in Jacobs Meadow, delineating where the Spartina is healthy and where, doing some salt marsh vegetation, etc. So really where I'm going with this is that there's student capabilities, and I think everybody understands that, and I think that that's a given. What I'd like to suggest is that one of the things that we can do a little bit better as a town is targeting some workforce development such that we have a pipeline, not only of GIS products that are useful for the town, but we have a pipeline of older students. I'm not talking about 8th graders, talking about seniors in high school and maybe even kids coming back looking for summer internships. But if we think broadly about the capacity to develop a youth workforce that's meeting town needs, I'm talking about focusing a lot of that on some GIS projects. So some food for thought would be this. My proposal would be that even though Nasser and his colleagues are moving forward with task 1, and that's going to be a slam dunk for them in one sense, what I was struck by in task 1 was that the deliverables talked about baseline mapping, and it was all based on GIS. I mean, what's available in the public domain and what's out there on Mass GIS. So even though that's not a deliverable that students can have already produced that with good metadata such that Nasser and his colleagues and others who come along could look at it, judge it, and say, yeah, this is good, we can use this, to model the viability of this workforce development that I think would help get some other grants as well. And Tim spoke about regionalization. So without thinking too big and too broadly and me not defining a particular task, all I'm going to propose is that this group endorsed the idea of students in parallel and outside the purview of this work, that CSCR get a group of students to basically work on developing that same set, as I said, in parallel, and it's not to impose upon the group in any way, but to kind of do a little bit of feasibility, viability. Can students deliver some low-hanging fruit, so to speak, deliverables that serve town interests? So if that made sense, it's really nothing to answer now. It's as I said, more food for thought.
Jack, I'd like to add to that from a slightly different angle. And thank you for that proposal. In the CHIP working group, we've been doing a number of things over the past 18 to 24 months. And one of the things we recognize is that in these studies, whether it's the MVP or the storm tide pathways or the Cohasset Harbor Resilience Program, we feel and this is another great example, we're making great progress on doing studies. Where we're challenged is creating public awareness and getting public support that would be helpful when we actually propose solutions, which are undoubtedly expensive. We're going to need significant public support from the town of Cohasset, the voters and citizens. And so I think I'm excited around CHIP and, sort of to dovetail with Jack's proposal, being able to use the youth of the town and the committees of the town and get citizens involved as we're doing this, so that when these public meetings happen in March and June, that there is broad-based engagement supporting the studies, which will come out with some great findings of things to do that will, cost millions of dollars. And we need not only support to go after the millions of dollars in grants, but we need support from the town to prioritize this work. And I think we recognize in the harbor over the studies that there's going to be challenges with, implementing solutions for the public good that may, be challenging to private property owners, both good and bad. So to the degree that as part of the study, Nasser, we can get the public engaged and potentially use the youth of Cohasset to get their families engaged, that would be a great opportunity, I think. Thank you.
And George, I'll just add on to that. I see Montana has joined us. Montana is going to be a terrific resource for all of this, working not only with the efforts that the Woods Hole Group is going to be doing, but also what the Harbor Committee and CHIP and the Climate Resiliency is doing. Montana grew up in Cohasset, knows CSCR well, knows the schools well, knows the community well, and I'm sure she'll be a huge help in getting the public awareness where it needs to be.
Welcome, Montana.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. If I haven't met you already, it's nice to meet all of you. And yes, I'm very excited to work with you and hope make these dreams come true. So nice to meet all of you.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you for the initial set of questions here. And maybe we've started to respond to some of these questions I have posed as well. I think, we have a bit more time here, and I'm hoping we can maybe just get through some of these. So I think I know the answer to some of these questions, but would like to hear it from the horse's mouth, I guess. If we could maybe do like a round robin, if people will volunteer to go and talk a bit about their responses to some of these questions, it would be great. And whichever one speaks to you most is fine. We can jump around. I'm taking notes here in an organized way, so I can tease it out later.
I'll jump in again and speak very briefly about question number one, broad or narrow concerns about flooding in the project area. What I'd love to know is what are the strategies for rebuilding the fringe salt marsh around Border Street and Margin Street. The Margin Street side is decaying and perhaps on its way out. So I guess fringe marsh, and what is its what's the diagnosis and what's its prognosis, and can it play any role in building resiliency through investing in green infrastructure?
Thanks, Jack. I'll just add also in terms of adding to question number one, when I think about concern and flooding in the area, we've already spoken a great deal about the impact of the wastewater facility given its proximity, but also thinking about Elm Street corridor and the location of public safety in that, you know, and I maybe if Chief Quigley has this figure on the top of his head, I don't know what percentage of emergency response calls go down towards the harbor, but there is a percentage, and understanding what that means and flooding scenarios and implications on our, you know, public emergency management response. In addition to how it impacts, of course, our critical infrastructure.
Yeah, the chief is otherwise indisposed, but
Yes, he may be busy.
I have noted.
Thank you.
I'll jump in there, Lauren. We discussed that. Basically, if you look at a larger map of Cohasset, you know, you come out of the police and fire station, it's all one facility. Either they go left or right. And the coastal road, Atlantic Avenue, you know, comes from Elm Street, Margin Street. And response times, which is kind of critical in emergencies. We had a flooding issue with Treats Pond a little further down, which the Concom was able to help us on. But at any rate, you know, with cutting off that avenue for emergency response, you have to go all the way around Little Harbor or Beach Street, and it's a much longer distance for response. And if you're in an issue where it's a storm, there could be other avenues that are cut off too. So I'd say it's pretty critical. We've looked at it a few different ways along that corridor. And I guess I'll just jump in here on the concerns about the flooding project area. You know, that same area that floods Margin Street. We talked about the wastewater treatment plant being the physical plant, but I&I is a huge issue, and it's a consistent issue that we battle with the older sewers down there. They're gravity sewers, and if you have even a pretty small leak, you know, visually it looks like a small leak. You could have a significant amount of those, and it kind of overwhelms the treatment process in the plant. And if you disrupt that treatment, you could potentially be getting into a bypass scenario where you're then discharging untreated sewage into the harbor, which is obviously something we don't want to do. So I&I on all the collection system on Margin Street, Border Street, and everything in and around the harbor is as important as, you know, keeping the treatment plant above water.
And are you have you conducted kind of CCTV, you know, scans, or do you have kind of lining programs or anything like that, or is that part of your wish list of future things to do?
Yeah, no, yeah, we've done the CCTV. It's just you know, as kind of most sewer collection systems build out, they start near the harbor and they kind of grow out from there. And you know, most of our coastal area is sewered. Well, all of our coastal area is sewered with the exception of South Main Street. But the oldest part of that infrastructure is right here where we're talking about. It's from like the 70s. It's old, not that old, but it is clay, you know, it's clay pipe and it's gravity, which is subject to infiltration if you have any kind of leaks or cracks or anything like that.
Others from a non-infrastructure standpoint, or?
Well, I'm curious, you mentioned the Elm Street corridor and the project that it was essentially completed a while ago. We were unsuccessful in getting the funding we needed in order to implement the recommendations. Maybe Lauren, this is for you. Is that still alive? Is there a possibility we'll get the funding we applied for, or are we back to square one?
So that funding potential is off the table, but where Elm Street corridor is, there still ultimately will be a decision point when it comes time to put that into the pavement plan as to what that entails, what level of repaving. Brian can speak a bit more to this, but I will say that it is not in the most upcoming schedule, which is why it has sort of been put onto a back burner, because there was never a real decision. Elm Street Corridor Working Group made a recommendation onto what conceptual design should continue towards more advanced engineering levels. That has not progressed, and we do not yet have funding in place to do that.
Just piggybacking on that. So Elm Street is on the top of our paving list as it has been for a couple of years, and it's falling apart. So it, you know, it's on schedule for something next year, and whether that's just patching or an overlay, you know, hopefully we'll have more discussion with the select board and whoever else to come up with a decision on, are we just doing mill and overlay existing configuration, or are we going to do the option that was selected by the working group and reconfigure the curbing and the island and things like that.
Brian, might this be premature if we learn that that parts of Elm Street the grade needs to be elevated? It'd be a shame to have just paved it to learn that we need to raise it.
Yeah, that came up in discussion with on Margin Street. So Margin Street and Atlantic Avenue, where it connects in by Whitehead, that's on slated to be done. That's going to be done next summer. And one of the select board had mentioned, I forget whom, said, let's just raise it up while we can, or go for the money to raise it up. But without having a full vetted study, an engineering study like NASA's doing, and then looking at those options on, you know, should we just do the seawall? Should we do a seawall with the road? Should we do the breakwater, the seawall and the road? And by how much do we need to elevate that to mitigate the flooding? I think we're premature in raising anything, because, you know, once you raise a road, you're impacting private properties on both sides, and you need to obviously feather that road down. You can't just have an abrupt, so it includes, you know, private property, whether it's takings or easements, or, you know, it's you know, for every foot in elevation grade, you know, you might be going out up to 100 feet on either side. So it's not just raise the road, because you're raising the road and then you're getting the grade, you know, everyone's driveway cuts and things like that correct as well.
We have a preliminary notion of how high we might actually need to raise these based on the Center for Coastal Studies storm tide pathways analysis of last year, or was it the year before? I guess it was 2020. And it pretty clearly shows that parts of our roadways are way below what we would hope for if we had a significant storm from the storm tide perspective. And it doesn't really didn't take into account anything to do with inland flooding, you know, freshwater flooding. And I know that that's outside of the Woods Hole Group study area, so probably not the time or place to discuss that, but we do have that preliminary information.
No, it's a fair question. And Nasser, would you mind, could you go back to that sea level rise kind of multiple travelers? So, I mean, my thought on Margin and Atlantic and even Elm Street is, you know, they're pretty busy roads, and you're probably going to get a 15-year lifespan at best, or you know, 10 to 15. So is now that they're so bad that it's becoming an unsafe condition that we pave them. And if you project forward 10 years from 2020, you know, you might be looking at that 1.3 feet with the high risk. So I think in the lifespan of a road, I think that projection is reasonable to pave it at its current elevation until we figure out what we want to do and how much that should be, you know.
And yeah, I would just add that some of the GIS based results from our model, from the existing modeling that's done statewide, we'll be giving to the town, which could be used for, the entire town. So, if there are areas outside this project study area, and you're wondering, what is the 2030 1% or 100-year, flood elevation, or flood elevation with waves, that data is readily available and will be transferred to the town, so the town could use it even potentially for, regulatory purposes, let's say.
And Brian, what are the considerations if that roadway is raised? What type of additional study and needs to be done for the drainage that might have to be enhanced if the roadway is actually forming a higher dam from an inland point of view?
So the drainage, everything out there, the collection system on Elm Street comes down and it discharges into the harbor near the tide gate. And some of it does go upstream into Jacobs Meadow and then out through the tide gate. So I think in raising the road, I don't know if we need to reconfigure any of the stormwater collection system. I think everything just would be raised. It might be a good idea if we were doing it to do a little bit, some storm scepter BMPs, to clean up any kind of stormwater discharge.
I was thinking also around Stockbridge Street, if that was raised.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue with raising margin at Stockbridge is just the tight proximity. It's an old colonial village and everything is so tight that it includes a lot of private property. I think that's the bigger challenge more than I guess the collection or the water system or the stormwater.
And that question about kind of if you raise the road, does it make inland flooding worse, is one that will be evaluated. It's only, only a model like the one we're creating is going to be able to, evaluate those types of questions. And that's one of the intentions of modeling the different strategy sets, is to see what kinds of impacts, whether it has independent value in doing something like that, or if it makes problems worse for other elements.
Nasser, can you scroll back to the map that shows the scope, the area that you're going to address?
Yeah, this is not a full map. This was just the preliminary watershed boundary. But in addition to this, we're kind of looking at, parts of the cove where there's a nexus between flooding that would come in from the coast and the watershed. So, there are some low-lying areas around here, probably extends a little bit further around here. And then, there could be considerations for, on the other side of Summer Street as well.
Yeah, all of this is connected. Clearly, flooding in the Treats Pond area can have a spillover effect into a somewhat wider area. Similarly, flooding in the Gulf system would also have an impact. This, where your cursor is now, is one of the storm tide pathways that were identified by the earlier study, the 2020 study. And so we've had something of a discussion about talking with Situate to partner here, because clearly if their system fails, say at Egypt Beach, Nesquatchquet Pond, those floodwaters are going to come down the Gulf River and enter the low-lying areas downtown through that very area that you were just highlighting with your cursor. So we sort of need a bit more of a broader view of this. Obviously, that's not going to happen with this study, but we do need to kind of zoom out a little bit to understand better how what happens in our neighbors, particularly Situate situation, would impact us.
Yeah, and to the extent that like those coastal flooding dynamics are, I mean, to a large extent, those should already be included in the model. What's not included in the existing Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model is, you know, things like the tide gate at Jacobs Meadow, right? Or the culverts under the you know, under the center of town or under the T right of way. So those bigger landscape level sources of flooding from the Gulf River, for example, are captured in the model and would be part of the evaluation of the effectiveness of different regional coastal flood strategies, coastal flood control strategies.
So then the project area would extend pretty much along the bottom margin of your illustration there, from the southeasterly most pendant of the watershed to the Gulf River.
In terms of like the hazard that's coming from coastal flooding, yes. Yeah. In terms of the hazard coming from coastal flooding, yes. What we're not doing is modeling this watershed, right? So to know what happens from an inland flooding perspective, and to say, you know, what effect does this have on inland flooding issues, you know, or if you were to raise a part of Summer Street or another road over here, what would the effect be, you know, far upstream? That's not part of our analysis.
Yeah, I think I may have missed George's question. I think your question was, if you created a dam with a raised road elevation, what would it do upstream? And I think the topography, the general topography in Cohasset, it's kind of quick upland and with these, you know, kind of valleys where you have these stormwater pathways. So, and the majority of that stormwater flow doesn't go over the existing roads. It goes into, you know, collection systems upstream. So I think, you know, the topography, you know, even around Stockbridge or Margin it would go to the marshes on either side and the collection system that's there. So I think we wouldn't have to reconfigure. We'd probably have to update some of it, but as far as a wholesale reconfiguration, I don't think that's necessary.
Thanks, Brian. I have a question. It may be to you, Lauren, as well as Nasser. Nasser, your question number 2, how are your organizational interests served by the project? You know, I'm looking at the participants today. We have Harbor Committee, Conservation, a number of town officials, Bill Quigley, Chief Quigley. Lauren, what other groups or areas in town or organizations, whether they're committees or others, do you think are potentially impacted or actually informed by this study? And I'm again thinking back to forward to the public forums and the kind of engagement we want from the town. Who are organizations that you envision that could be enhanced by this study?
So George, I don't know if you saw the list of original stakeholders that I invited to this committee is that list that I had originally brainstormed. We do have a larger exhaustive list that includes the full committees of each of the representatives that you see here: conservation, sewer, you know, harbor. We will invite, for example, like the planning board in general of interest of planning, but for the purpose of the stakeholder meeting, we really just wanted those key target audiences to start this conversation. Other than that, we're open to suggestions. I mean, beyond the list that I already gave everyone in terms of public safety, public works, the different committees that are here. If you think there's someone missing, this is the time to let us know so that we can incorporate them as we move forward.
Thank you. I mean, what I'm envisioning, again, maybe I'm too excited about it, but the public forum that may be coming up with initial findings, we certainly experienced high level of interest in our January forum when Jack and Tom and Mark Borelli presented, you know, some of these very, anyway, presented visually and otherwise what the effects of sea level rise and storms are. I would expect we could, you know, get a lot of a similar or higher level of participation via Zoom to a conference. And I'm just thinking, again, how do we build on the awareness that comes from such a session and try and create momentum in the town of Cohasset around, you know, the expectation of potential solutions and what we're going to do with those. But you do a great job on that, Lauren, in building, you know, and setting up that awareness. I want to take it as far as we can on that.
He's had to step off the call, but Justin Schreier is our communications point person on staff, and he's been doing a good job of publicizing the zoning bylaw forum that's ongoing right now. So we will, when the time comes to publicize and get the word out for these public meetings, we'll utilize Justin's reach and different resources that he has to get the word out to people.
Terrific. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank
One
you.
of the things that I'm concerned about is that this project that Nasser has been describing goes until the spring. By the spring, Montana will be about halfway through her tenure in the first year here. And we are undoubtedly going to be needing to write grants that we're looking for the tens of millions of dollars for the work that has to be done around the harbor and elsewhere. Is there an opportunity to get a jump start on that so that we at least can have an idea of where these grants are and what we have to do in order to make a successful proposal to get those grants? And that's kind of to some extent tied into my previous question about the grants that were successful in Hingham.
We do have an idea of grants that we will be tracking already, Tim, and you know, to the extent possible, we'll continue to try to advance this particular project through the Coastal Zone Management Program. We were, you know, pleased to hear when we got the original award that this particular program really does like to see projects through the phases of from data collection to implementation of a project. You know, whether that means, you know, if we get a recommendation from this study for an infrastructure improvement, we can continue to plug away as we follow that through fruition and construction. So that is what we will continue to chip away at. And to the extent possible, we'll work with, you know, for example, we partnered with Woods Hole Group on this grant application to put it together and get it in. That was a successful award. So we would continue to do that. I hope that answers your question.
Well, partially, but I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but I'll follow up later, Lauren. Thank you.
Questions back up here. To the I think one point was made earlier about the survey data that was collected. Are there any other sort of sources of information that maybe we didn't mention in this that you think would be really important for us to get our hands on and review, and do you have them? I think I'll be following up on the offer of additional GIS data if it's available. But anything else that you're thinking about in terms of past studies that were funded or implemented in the town, stuff that we may not be aware of.
Or if anything comes to anyone after our meeting today, you can send them to me and I'll share them with Nasser. So, you know, if something comes to you after.
Nasser, I can just provide you a list of the GIS layers that may be helpful to you, and so we can coordinate after.
Great. All right. What about question 4? Are there, I heard about the breakwater. I heard interest on Fringe Marsh, about the beach in Situate, and I'm wondering if there are other. We heard about roadways, raising roadways or seawalls. Are there other regional resiliency strategies you think we should be aware of, kind of at the early stages now? So as we move forward, we're keeping them in mind and keeping them on our radar.
One of them, one of the issues is really the peat banks that we have that are naturally eroding. But they do protect a lot of the infrastructure around the harbor, both in Cohasset and in Situate. And there are ways we've discussed to make them more resilient. One way is to install the green mussels, which I don't know if you're familiar with them, Nasser, but they really act as almost a concrete barrier once they get established in the peat. So there are projects like that, I think, that are both local and within the area that you're talking about, and also more regional that would include Situate.
Great.
I'm not sure. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
The watershed, the James Brook watershed is about 7%. 7% of the area are wetlands. And obviously these are really important for flood control. We are threatening them on a regular basis. We see this in Conservation Commission. And these obviously are very important aspects of the watershed in terms of flood control. So any sort of comments or advice that you could make regarding how we can utilize those more effectively would be helpful.
So to add to that, something that conservation also sees is, we review stormwater as part of our jurisdiction, and there's a lot of really great strategies of low impact, development designs. I mean, we don't have our own bylaw on LID measures, but if there's anything that could be incorporated, maybe for any town projects or anything like that, where we can incorporate that, that might help, because we definitely seen other towns have their own bylaws and standards of how to incorporate all those measures to try and reduce, impervious and improve green infrastructure and all those different solutions. So yeah, I'm not sure if that was already kind of an idea for you guys, but that could definitely help maybe cross some of those paths.
Yeah, and there are is Cohasset a green community?
We are.
Okay, yeah, I believe that there are, in addition to kind of model bylaws out there, maybe MAPC has produced those, but I believe they have grants also available to do that as like follow-up policy work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, certainly as part of this project, we'd be looking at in part of those regional strategy sets, effective strategies for minimizing or reducing upland flood risk or combined flood risk that's coming from the stormwater component. So definitely in our on our radar.
Another idea about regional work, and actually Tom might be able to weigh in on whether this has any value or not, but Tom had mentioned that he's part of that Tri-Town Ware River. I think
that's Rory Park Committee.
Yeah. So anyways, I was always wondering whether that was something that we should pursue with Situate and Norwell with respect to the Gulf River. And because the Gulf Rivers, the ecosystem of the Gulf River is outside the scope of this project, but it's already been acknowledged that the Gulf River obviously has an impact on.
It could probably be expanded even further. The Erin River watershed has portions in Hingham, Norwell, and Situate. And we've had a lot of sort of speculation about what's driving the pathologies in the Gulf River. And a close look at that would be really valuable. Again, that's way outside of what the scope of what Woods Hole Group is going to do, but it's just, since you brought it up, I thought I'd interject that.
Yeah, and I don't know. Thanks, Tom. And the one thing that I was wondering about is whether it's effective or not, or whether it just becomes another bureaucratic group that doesn't have enough muscle to copy that Ware River Estuary Park model in the Gulf River. So just an idea, it's getting on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also the president-elect of the Mystic River Watershed Association, and they've done a great job of creating a kind of regional resilience committee that, or several of them, and subcommittees that bring together the municipalities that are part of these kind of shared watersheds to tackle issues of climate resilience, and have been pretty successful in using that as a platform, with individual projects being led by different municipalities along the way, for getting a lot of grant funding. So there's help in that for sure. I agreed with some of this being quite beyond our particular scope in this project, but it's potentially this project could be a model for similar types of work in other watersheds in the town and region.
Nasser, I guess you mentioned you already had the materials from the Cohasset Climate Resilience Forum. Cassandra and Lauren have done a terrific job of organizing them on the Town of Cohasset website under the Cohasset Harbor Committee. A lot of the resources you mentioned are there. I would want to just make a plug that we have the presentations, particularly from Tom, from Jack, from Bill Quigley and others that are up there as, PowerPoints and GISs. But if you have the time, I'd highly recommend, if you can make it, to actually look at the videos where those folks brought those presentations to life. And
yeah, I did. I watched all of it actually. Admittedly in the background while doing other things, but on this project, on this first task here, definitely went through them and listened to some of it. So I put down a few flag points of things to go back to, related to public safety and the wastewater issues and I&I and things like that.
Terrific. I appreciate your diligence on that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great initiative that you all put together.
Any last remaining questions or points of information you want to share with Nasser before we conclude for today? Brian?
Hi, yes. So just going next steps and next meeting. So correct me if I'm wrong. So I mean, I'm just jumping forward to the final deliverable. We're on the model is based on a certain sea level rise, and we have 3 bites of the apple on what configurations or reconfigurations infrastructure wise we can do. Just want to make sure that we're all in line with what those 3 might be, and how are we going to brainstorm, I guess, next steps on kind of brainstorming those options, or at what point will we be ready to brainstorm on what ifs, what to do?
That's a great question. I think we first will need the modeling results, and hopefully the vulnerability assessment as well, so that we can kind of see, what is at risk when, where. As you mentioned, the topography is, rises quickly in a lot of places, and so it's not likely to be too many surprises, but it will give us more refined information with which to make some decisions, like on particular strategies or even phasing of different strategies. Yeah, I don't think we have actually necessarily mapped out a process for coming up with those strategy sets. So that's something we can work on a little bit and figure out, if there's some kind of interim step, before we start modeling things out, to make sure that we're collaborating with the relevant stakeholders on what those strategies might be. But they are likely to include a lot of the things that were discussed today. So I think in terms of the content of what they might be, I think we have a good sense for what you're looking for or anticipating, and that aligns really closely with what we were anticipating. So that's positive. Devil's always in the details. So yeah, it would be good to touch bases before we start running simulations, so that we don't kind of need to do rework and things like that.
Okay, great. And then just a step further. So will there be any cost data on the strategies, or is it basically, this many, just we've raised this many linear feet of seawall by X amount?
I have to look again back at the scope and maybe if so let me check on that and get back to you. Or if you want to wait here for the next couple of minutes here, I can pull it up myself and take a look.
You
I
can get
think-
back. I'm kind of going forward. Like we get to the end and we have some sort of capital project, and I
Certainly.
just want to be able to talk to the capital budget committee and the town in general on, this is what we're thinking of doing, and kind of projecting those costs and hopefully get some grants or whatever in the future. That cost data is important.
Of course. Yeah, we fully recognize that. And it's typically part of our program. It's definitely part of the wastewater resiliency recommendations as well. So
Awesome.
Let me just look that up if others want to put any other final thoughts on the table.
Any other final thoughts, folks? No. All right. Well, while we wait on this last information point, I just want to say thank you all for taking the time. I know this was it's a tough week. We have Thanksgiving here, so I appreciate you taking 2 hours out of your day on a condensed week to come together and kick off the stakeholder event. We will keep you in the loop as this progresses. And per Brian's point, we'll figure out another time that we can reconvene before we start to go sort of live with the next phasing to make sure we're all on the same page. If you, like I said, if you have any thoughts or anything that comes up after this that you think, oh, I want to share that as well, I'll be the prime contact point for any information back and forth with Woods Hole Group. So just send that to me via email and I'll make sure it gets over to Nasser. And again, just thank you all. I appreciate your time. Nasser, did you have
Yes,
anything
I do
else?
have an answer. Yeah. So included in our scope is to develop order of magnitude construction cost for preferred coastal flood mitigation strategies. So we might not develop construction costs for every possible alternative, but for those that seem to rise to the top, that are, it sounds like coastal in nature, we would do that.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you again, everyone. We will be in touch. Nasser, you and I will connect offline about all the things that we need to circle back on. And again, thank you for your time and happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Lauren.
Thank you.
Good to
You
meet you
too.
all.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thanks for all
Take
your
care.
engagement. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Nasser.
You got it.